My guest is here, and I want to get to my guest because I don't want him waiting for a long time during my monologue. We are joined with a crowd favorite, actually, Brian Berletic. Let me bring him on. Host of the new Atlas, a fantastic show. Um, I watched that show before I even knew who Brian Berletic was, for God's sake. Brian Berletic is a Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host of the new Atlas. Brian, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me back. And I think that was an excellent monologue. I'm not even sure what else I could add to it.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. I mean, look, I know that there are some people who go with this idea that, well, Donald Trump is a peace candidate. And, well, he tried to make peace in Ukraine. Well, he tried to make peace with the Iranians. He did make a peace deal with the Palestinians. But I think what they're missing is that there are two sides to negotiations. And if you craft the deal that you know is going to fail, then that's not you being a peace anything. That is you effectively gaming the system to get this tape as if you are something that you're effectively not. I want to get your take on some of the events that are taking place around the world right now. And let's start off in Ukraine. You posted a tweet that I thought was fantastic. And you pointed out that this kind of diversity of concerns that, okay, well, the US doesn't want to be overly occupied in Ukraine. And so their thought is, well, we need to continue what George Bush was talking about right there with that NATO clip in 2008, the Bucharest summit. But we need Europe to take more of the burden so we can focus on issues of China. Dig into that for me. If you had to explain this to somebody and you had to kind of make this point clear to a MAGA supporter that, hey, Trump is not the guy who you say he is, go into that for me. Give that explanation to the true believers out there. I'll call them that.
I think a lot of Trump supporters would accept that the United States is a modern day empire. It's engaged in political interference and military conflict all around the globe. Its military is stretched all around the globe. And I think a lot of Trump supporters who have good intentions and they want to see the US turn inward and build itself up rather than continuously interfere abroad, I think they would accept that premise. The problem is, just as you say, they backed President Trump because he said he was going to end all of these conflicts. And the dangerous thing is now they've invested so much in President Trump that even when he does a complete 180, that they're still going to support him and they'll start trying to rationalize these things that he's doing. That, just as you say, it's a blatant violation and betrayal of his campaign promises. Now, what the United States is doing is what every empire in terminal decline does. It starts outsourcing empire to all of the vassals that it has captured and drawn in and expanded its empire with. We remember the Roman Empire using what they called auxiliaries. These were foreign troops, entire armies of foreign troops that the Romans were using as an extension of their own military power because they themselves were in decline. They didn't have enough Roman troops who were originally Roman citizens to go around. And so they began depending on these auxiliaries. And it worked for a while. It didn't stop terminal decline. It kind of put it off until a later date. But that is what we're watching. Once again, we're watching the United States using Europe, trying to use Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, every nation that it has political influence over or has already completely politically captured. They are transforming them into a battering ram they can use to continue all of these conflicts. So having someone else take over the conflict for you and continue it, or at least try to freeze it until a later date, that's not ended. That's just like you said, that wasn't, and that's not a peace candidate or a peace president. It's a scam artist who told you one thing and did another. All of these conflicts clearly, obviously, are all going to continue just through other means. And not even really, because the US is still going to be sending weapons and money to Ukraine. They're just going to be doing it through Europe.
I don't even know if it's through entirely Europe. That mineral deal is effectively a Lend-Lease agreement.
Yes.
Like, initially, I was like, this deal doesn't make sense. Like, how we are sending them weapons with the idea that the weapons equal some kind of money. And in 20 to 30 years, Ukraine is supposed to pay us back with the proceeds that it gets from whatever they get. Now, as I pointed out, we don't even know what those other documents are. The RADA doesn't even know what those other documents are because there are multiple documents associated with it. But what we do know is that they've come up with some kind of arrangement where Trump can send weapons, money, etc. He is apparently crafting sanctions, which is effectively exactly what Joe Biden was doing and what MAGA said that they didn't want because Joe Biden was doing it. So it seems that there's going to be direct infusions of money and cash. Do you think this is in any way going to inhibit this kind of decline that seems obvious at this point to anybody who's paying attention to it?
No, because it's just a continuation of exactly what the Biden administration was doing, which is what I warned people about even before when he was a candidate. Trump won the election. I warned that this was going to happen. This is what he did the first 4 years he was in office. This is what President Obama did. Everyone pinned their hopes on him to end all of these wars. And that's what he said he was going to do. And then for 8 years straight, he did the exact opposite. He not only continued all of the wars handed over to him, he started new wars that President Bush Jr. ran out of time to provoke and carry forth. And so that this is exactly what the Trump administration is doing, except it's been split by the Biden administration. 4 years of Trump, 4 years of Biden, now the other 4 years of Trump. And if you weren't really paying attention to who was in the White House, would you even notice any difference in terms of actual policy? This whole thing with the Ukraine mineral deal, you could see the narrative that they were using to draw Americans along. If they could just get half or a good percentage of the population to go along with this, they can politically kick the can down the road. That's what this is all about. It's about making it look transactional when in reality, it is just a complete continuation of what the Biden administration was doing, because it isn't Biden's policy. It's not Trump's policy. It is the unelected corporate financier interests that fund these think tanks, that devise these policies and send them to Washington with lobbyists, get people on both sides to sign off on it. And so you look at the mineral deal, and the Trump administration is talking about, well, Ukraine's going to pay us money for these weapons. We're not just giving them these weapons. With what money? Their economy is destroyed. And their economy is never, ever going to come back as long as this conflict continues. They will never have an economy capable of paying for these weapons. They're going to send these weapons to Europe. Maybe they can shift it a little bit onto European taxpayers, but it's still going to be American money one way or another paying for these weapons. And then just think about how morally bankrupt the whole premise of the mineral deal is in the first place. This is your proxy war. You are fighting Russia, using Ukraine as an intermediary, and then you're telling the victim that you threw into this proxy war. You overthrew the government. You handpicked and installed a client regime. You threw them into this proxy war. You have destroyed the country. Now you're demanding all of the money back on your own proxy war you're waging against Russia from the country that you politically captured. It is completely insane. I don't know what other way to describe it. And for Trump supporters, who, again, they had good intentions to begin with, but for them to just even hear this premise, just at face value, and not stop and think, what is this? What are we doing? We started this with Russia in Ukraine. How's it now Ukraine's problem to pay us back for our own failed proxy war? It doesn't make any sense at all. And if it was President Biden doing it, we would never hear the end of it. But now it's their guy, just like the Obama supporters. Now that it's their guy in office, suddenly it's okay. This is the problem.
Oh, so true. Oh, so true. Why do you think that thread runs through, and this sounds weird, it seems like there's a thread that regardless of the president, it runs through, meaning regardless of what a candidate's intentions are, and who the hell knows what their intentions are, right? Let's get into their mind. But it seems like there's a consistent thread of foreign policy that regardless of the president, that's the direction it goes. So yeah, we're going to pressure Iran. Yeah, we're going to pressure Russia. Yeah, we're going to pressure, like, it's this consistent campaign. I mean, is that the issue of empire? The moment that once they get into office, well, I am now the president of this empire and I need to preserve this empire. And if I do something different, the media is going to attack me. I have people around me that tells me, hey, this is what you're supposed to be doing. Like, what do you think it is that pushes this wind or that boat forward?
Well, it's, you have to follow the money. Who ultimately is driving U.S. foreign and domestic policy? Who has all the money, all of the influence, control over the people who have all of the guns? Who is it? Is it actually the president? When you really think about it, who is President Trump, and what can he do as a person and with his administration around him? Just because there's a piece of paper that says he's in charge, what actual physical force, what actual power enables him to enforce the policies that, let's just pretend he had agency and policies that he wanted? Nothing. He actually has no ability to do that. It is the corporations, deeply entrenched corporate financier monopolies that have tremendous power spanning decades, if not generations. And they're the ones that own the media. They own the politicians. They have these think tanks that are producing this policy. And people say, Brian, how did you know this? You were right. Oh, I doubted you. I thought President Trump was going to be different and he was going to change everything. But you were right. How did you know that? I didn't guess. I don't have special psychic powers. It's in the policy papers. And just to explain it for ordinary people to understand, just think about a project in your own personal life. You're going to build a house or even something tiny. I built a chicken coop, for example. You have to draw up plans to know how much wood you need to buy, how much you're going to cut off and assemble it. You don't just buy a bunch of nails, a hammer, and some wood, and you put together a house, or even something small like a shed or a chicken coop. You need to have blueprints. We're talking about a global spanning empire. You cannot just do that off the cuff, day to day, like people imagine President Trump and his administration are doing. No, you need policy papers. Those are the blueprints of empire. This is why I always tell people to go look at the policy papers. I know they're long, they're dry, it's academic English, it's very difficult to get through. You have to have a foundation of knowledge just to understand what they're talking about. But if you could get past that and read them, you will see that years ago, they were writing all of this out in detail, almost verbatim. And now each administration, they just go down the list and they're just checking off these measures that are to be implemented. I've talked about the RAND corporations extending Russia paper. That was from 2019. If you go through just the table of contents, you could see that this has been US policy for years and years since it was put out. 2009, the Brookings Institution switched path to Persia paper. This is the US playbook for Iran. Literally everything in the table of contents has either been done or is in the middle of being implemented. And for the Trump administration specifically, there is Project 2025. And that was actually published in 2023. And absolutely everything the Trump administration is doing right now is spelled out in detail in that policy paper. It's a combination of papers written by different authors. And even though Trump supporters will say, well, Project 2025 of this corporate financier-funded think tank, the Heritage Foundation, has nothing to do with the Trump administration. Those are neocons. This is the Trump administration. He's fighting the deep state, not serving it. But he has literally taken people who have written chapters for Project 2025 and incorporated them into his administration. Peter Navarro, for example, regarding trade and the tariffs. He wrote a whole chapter about drowning the world in tariffs to maintain American dominance, not to reindustrialize the U.S., to maintain American dominance. It was the first sentence in the chapter that he penned. So people have to stop responding to political rhetoric, which is designed solely for perception management, and they have to follow the money and the connections back to the policy papers and see where these ideas are actually coming from. When you read the policy paper, you can clearly see how it filters through the political rhetoric, how they're trying to sell it to the public, how they're trying to divide the public against each other to at least prop up one part or another of the policy, regardless of which side you pick. But once you do that, you cannot unsee it. And then you will never fall for partisan politics ever again. You will see straight through it. You understand that it is these corporations that are driving this policy. And if you think this policy is a problem, then it's ultimately the corporations creating this problem.
And to be clear, there's a rationale for it. It's not willy-nilly. I mean, See, in my mind, there's always two strands. There's the geopolitical that a political figure may take, and there's this kind of economic strand. Russia is a very rich country. And if they could get their hands on the resources of that country, oh my God, they would want to do it. And so, from a corporate sense, it makes all the sense in the world. And then you have people with these kind of geopolitical aspirations, let's say like a Joe Biden or, I don't know, big rando politician. It dovetails, but the very least it seems to. I mean, give me your take on that. Or do you think, no, it's not an issue of dovetailing. It's just the politician has people around him. And even if the politician doesn't know or is not entirely aware, look, I think Donald Trump is completely incompetent. I don't believe for a moment that he had the ability to sit down and read one of those papers. By the same token, as you point out, Peter Navarro is around him. Some of these other neocons are around him. And I would wager to you, they have. So whoever is in his ear, even if it's not necessarily Trump as an individual, they're still following playbook, if that makes sense. Or do you agree with that?
Well, obviously, President Trump doesn't know what he's doing. He thinks Spain is the S in BRICS. How does somebody like that actually understand what's going on and is the sole person driving U.S. foreign and domestic policy? Just simply isn't reality. That's not reality. President Biden, I mean, again, Trump supporters admit that President Biden was in charge of nothing. So if he was in charge of nothing, who was? Yeah. And why can't you take that and then see it in the same way with your candidate, President Trump, who's obviously not making these decisions? When the man talks, he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. If you've read these policy papers, you can see just how badly it's filtering through him and his poor understanding of these policies. This is what people are telling him to do. It filters through him as he tries to explain it with his abilities to explain it. And he's unable to do it clearly. And people think he's playing 5D chess. No, he just doesn't know what he's being told to do. He's just going along with it, just like he did the last 4 years, just like every US president in recent memory has done, regardless of whether it's Republican or Democrat. The main purpose of US foreign and domestic policy is to maintain domination. These are corporate monopolies. They don't want to compete. They don't want any competition. They don't want other companies around the globe to compete with them. They don't want any single nation state to have peer or near peer status. And this is open US policy since the end of the Cold War. The New York Times wrote a whole article about this back in the 90s, about how there's a policy paper in the Pentagon about making sure there's no US rival. That is how the US was going to proceed from the Cold War. No rivals, not Russia, not China, not Iran. All of these regions of the world, no matter how far from the US they actually are on the map, the US must maintain control over all of them. And that's what we have seen. And again, regardless of who is president, there's not even one single, even small exception to this rule.
Full spectrum dominance. That was the goal, right? It's like we need to control air, sea, space, all of those things. And after the Soviet Union fell, we would never have another rival against us. I guess my saving grace in all of this is it's one thing to put it on paper. It's another thing. Reality is different. Like reality doesn't care about your ideology. And as you point out, Trump explains the stuff poorly. He implements it poorly. I mean, so like when he's talking about tariffs, he can't even make the case, hey, we need to get businesses and manufacturing back into America. And yeah, this hurts now, but in a few years, et cetera. I mean, he can't even say that. What he says is, well, your kid can do without $30. I said, who the hell is buying $30? Right? It's like, that's not the standard that most people go with. Most people go with groceries. Most people go with buying a house, a car, et cetera. Not 30 teddy bears, or for that matter, 1,000 pencils. It's filtered through him in these kind of comically ridiculous ways. I 1,000% agree with you on this. It seems like they overestimate themselves, though. Or do you agree with that one? Like, it seems that the policy people overestimates U.S. power. And maybe that's because of decline. Like when George Bush was offering NATO membership in 2008, okay, well, the U.S. was on top of the world, right? It's another thing to do it now in 2025. Like, is that how you see it? Where there's a drift, and when you write that paper, it's one thing, but as you drift, it may not be the same reality that you're trying to implement going back to, 1990 or 2000 or whatever, 2001, when you might have been at the height of your powers.
Absolutely. I mean, there's this common saying, it looks good on paper, but then how does it actually translate in reality? And people who pursue global empire, the United States making up 4.5% of the entire global population, presuming dominion over the rest of the entire planet. What kind of mentality must you be infected with to just even entertain that possibility? Why, if you're a normal, rational, logical person rooted in reality, why wouldn't you say to yourself, we should have a proportionate role among all other nations rather than attempting to impose ourselves on all other nations? And this is, in fact, the approach nations like Russia, China, the multipolar world. Multipolar means we're not going to have one nation dominating all other nations. We're going to have nations working together. No one is going to presume dominion over anyone else. And there's going to be a balance of power. We will all play proportional roles in a new world order, not this unipolar world order that the US has presumed over for decades now, since the end of the Cold War, even before that. And so just the mentality that they're approaching this with in the first place is completely detached from reality. It is a supremacist mindset. And you read these policy papers, they honestly believe that they are just inherently superior to the Russians. Obviously, all the jokes that they always tell about Russia. Mm-hmm. And of course, China. They say, it doesn't matter how many people there are in China. It doesn't matter how big their industrial base is. They did it by lying and cheating and stealing. And if we just get our acts together, we could outcompete China. In reality, it's just not possible. And because none of those excuses are true. They're not real. And and there is a racist component to this, obviously. Oh, yes. The United States has been tremendously racist all throughout its history, obviously. I mean, I have people arguing with me about this. It's obvious, it's self-evident. And even to this day, they still believe. How could you be the United States and say, it doesn't matter how big China is, we can outcompete them? Unless you honestly believe Americans, especially white Americans, are inherently superior to the Chinese. One American is worth however many, 4, 5, maybe even 10 Chinese people, because of this supremacist mindset. And this is something that the collective West has clung to for centuries. This has always been the mindset. The British Empire, the French Empire, all of these European empires have always clung to this mentality that they are just superior. They never looked at their power as circumstances of history. The Industrial Revolution started in the West. This gave them an advantage over everyone else who up to that point had no reason to rapidly advance technologically. But now nations have caught up. And it's not as if, like we can see with our own eyes, people in China are just as capable of using this technology and even independently advancing it, even in ways that the collective West is incapable of now at this point. Has nothing to do with race, but inside their mind, they still think that it does, and they still have this inherent advantage. And this is what is driving American foreign and domestic policy still at this point.
What do you think happens next in Ukraine? Do you believe a peace deal, no peace deal? The war continues until Russia effectively takes all of Ukraine or force an unconditional surrender. And for that matter, just to piggyback on it, where does Europe go with this? I mean, does Europe really fall in line and say, all right, we are going to be fed to the Russians. We can't even raise 25,000 people right now, but at some point we will feed our own citizens to the Russians. How far do you think this goes?
Well, unfortunately, Europe has been politically captured by U.S. special interests. So Europe will just do whatever the U.S. tells them to do. And I pointed out all the way back in February of this year, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth told Europe, you're going to double down on Ukraine. You're going to expand your military industrial base. Doesn't matter your social programs, your infrastructure, forget about that. You're expanding your military industrial base so you can make weapons and so that you can send Ukraine weapons. you're going to spend not 2% of your GDP on NATO, but up to 5%. So more than double you're going to spend on NATO, which is the core of the problem with Russia. Russia has been encircled, and they have attempted to contain Russia using NATO. It has spread up to and all along their border with every intention of absorbing Russia next. From Russia's point of view, this is existential, and they have said this on many occasions. That is the core issue here, NATO. And President Trump said he wants to bring peace. He wants to end this conflict. But when it comes to the core issue, NATO, he's not talking about freezing it, reducing it, withdrawing it from along Russia's border. He's talking about more than doubling the amount of money NATO is going to take from each one of these member states. So this was never designed to result in peace. It was always meant to freeze the conflict. It was, and I remember Secretary Hegseth literally said during this directive he was laying out to Europe, telling Europe, you're going to double down on Ukraine. We're not stopping this. There's no peace. You're going to get your troops and you're going to go into Ukraine as peacekeepers, again, to freeze the conflict like they froze the proxy war in Syria. He said this must not be a Minsk 3.0, but he was literally describing Minsk 3.0 with a little Syria-style buffer zone as a twist, as an added-on twist. And so that's what the U.S. was pursuing this entire time with peace talks, negotiations, always as a smokescreen. They did all of this behind, and it wasn't a very convincing smokescreen, not for me, not for people who were reading the policy papers and saw what was being set up. And there was this fake infighting between the US and Europe, and people were actually trying to say, look at Europe undermining President Trump and his peace talks by preparing this coalition of the willing to go into Ukraine. This is literally what Secretary Hegseth told them to do back in February. They were just doing what they were told to do. And I remember the British Minister of Defense even said face to face with Hegseth, you told us to ramp up our military spending and to do more on Ukraine, and we're doing it, and we'll do more. I mean, something like that. It's all on the Department of Defense's official website, even, and in videos you can watch. It's not like this is happening secretly, but they just hope that the rhetoric and the propaganda is more appealing and convincing, and truth is really ugly, and people will avoid that and cling to the propaganda. And for the most part, that is what people have done. A lot of people are shocked and dismayed now that President Trump has betrayed his campaign promises, or they're clinging to hope that he has some kind of a 5D plan where somehow this is still going to result in peace. But in reality, no, you were betrayed. And if you separated your emotions from your analysis, you would have saw this. This is just human nature. It's very difficult to do that. And they know that, and they take advantage of it.
I would tell you, I haven't read the policy papers. I worked at Russian radio station, and I knew just from analysis, like just from watching, it was like, okay, I give him the benefit of the doubt, see what he does. And I remember when he came out with his first plan, I was like, okay, this is absurd. Like the notion that you honestly, but for one, believing that they are so comically incompetent that they are not paying attention to the fact that those policy papers exist in the first place, that they don't hear Hegseth going to Europe saying, we need you to increase NATO budget, that they would accept an agreement where Europe is going to put peacekeepers. And you're like, this stuff was farcical. Like if you were trying to make this more comically ridiculous, you couldn't, I defy you to do it. Right. I don't know how you would even do it. I mean, they even had stuff like the US was going to take over Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. It's like, are you serious? Like, it was so outlandish. You would think that you would try to make a paper or make a deal that was close to the edge, right? That it was close enough where you can justify saying, hey, we tried to make peace. The documents that they came out with was ludicrous. I agree with you. The public is going to be like, well, Donald Trump tried to make peace. They're going to say it. And they're going to say, well, the Russians are just, not into peace. Putin just doesn't want it. And they're going to ignore the Minsk agreements. They're going to ignore the Istanbul agreements. They're going to ignore just before the war where Putin was like begging Europe to come to the table on his own, basically on a deal where they can negotiate a new security architecture of Europe. The US media is not going to cover any of that, nor have they probably covered any of that. So the public is not going to know. And I think you're right. they're going to say, well, Trump tried to make peace, which is sad on so many levels. Like, it's so outlandish. It just really is. Yeah, that's unfortunate because Shoigu made the point of saying that Europe is effectively preparing for war. And even the buildup on the Finnish border is Russia acknowledging they seem to be preparing for war. And we need to effectively go with this kind of old Soviet-style defense plan of creating this kind of fortress country because they've surrounded our borders at this point. But do you think they're really even they're up to that? I mean, like, Europe is a basket case. And truth be told, for all the talk about the US saying we want 5%, the US has deindustrialized Europe. I mean, they've eaten them alive in regards to the money that they're sending for weapons. Okay, well, that money is going to the US. The 5 times amount for LNG. Okay, that money is going to the US. Like, you have these huge expenditures of money that are fleeing Europe into America. Companies being deindustrialized, especially Germany. Again, closing shop, or for that matter, going to the US. How could they even support an industrial base when their countries have effectively been gutted by following US policy religiously? It's just astonishing to me. Do you really think they're going to be able to build up their militaries in 5 years or whatever they're planning on doing this?
No, but look, Ukraine never had any chance either. This was always the way it was going to work out for Ukraine. It was going to be completely destroyed. This is the point of, I mean, even in the Rand Corporation paper from 2019, they said, is under a chapter titled Provide Lethal Aid to Ukraine. And they said, these are all the benefits. You know, you're going to overextend Russia. You're going to draw them in and get them tied up in an Afghanistan style conflict, just like during the 1980s, which, you know, the implications are you could possibly precipitate a Soviet Union style collapse from all of that. But then the risks were Ukraine will be completely destroyed. They will lose their territory. They will have disproportionate casualties, and they might even be forced into a disadvantageous peace, which is literally what is happening right now. Every single thing they warned about happened, but they already knew that. They already knew that back in 2019. They knew that, and they did it anyway. And they know that Europe is going to suffer the same fate. They don't care. That's the whole point of having proxies, is you're feeding them into the wood chipper so you don't go through the wood chipper. You're sending them through. And when you're done with the Ukrainians, you need to find someone else. So they'll put the Baltic nations in, Poland, and then France, Germany. They don't care. And from their point of view, and I think we've talked about this before, they see the possibility of having some sort of not quite World War III, but a devastating conflict spanning Eurasia between Europe and Russia, and then China and all of America's proxies in the Asia-Pacific region, maybe a little crossover. And the US is going to be all the way over there with the Atlantic on one side, the Pacific on the other side, and they'll emerge out the other side, best positioned to reassert domination over the planet, which is exactly what they did after World War II. And I think we also talked about this. They're just crossing their fingers and hoping, you know, Russia and China don't decide to, you know, scour the surface of America with nuclear weapons, or something doesn't spiral out of control. Or who knows, maybe Russia and China weather it. They build up their military and industry even larger and more urgently, and come out the other side of this an even bigger threat to American hegemony on the other side. Who knows? But this, again, this is what's going on inside their head. Doesn't mean that it's rational. Nothing about this has been rational up until this point. Why would anything going forward from here be rational?
But if I was a sociopath, maybe it is rational. And what I mean by, I know this sounds horrible, but what I mean by that is, if your objective is world domination and you make up 4% of the globe, how, as you point out, how do you at 4% of the globe control the rest of 7 billion human beings? And can you really do it if China, Russia, Iran, India, Brazil, like, meaning all of these countries grow, develop, build up industry, build up technology, competing on the world market, competing on the world stage? We come away with an assessment that we are fantastic because after the Second World War, there was nobody else. Like meaning like everybody else for the most part have been destroyed. And so it's like, hey, our industries are doing fantastic. With the dollar is doing fantastic. Yeah, because there's nobody else. And we've somehow internalized that as we're exceptional. Okay,
Yes.
well, you can't really be exceptional in a global marketplace. You can't even be exceptional against China. You can't even be exceptional against Russia. So, what is it rational to come away with an assessment? All right, all of these people need to die, full stop. And we are in a fight for survival of being the apex country. And the only way we can really do that, if we get into a nuclear exchange, okay, well, that's problematic. You lose if you die. But if we can push everybody else into one, okay, then we have a chance. Meaning they may not be looking at this as this is flat fat, what's going to take place. It's if we do nothing, we lose it all. I mean, is that it's immoral, it's unethical, agreed. It's but see, I always make this argument that this stuff is about power. It's not about human life. It's not about right and wrong. It's not about ethics or morality. It's just about how do you gain control and how do you gain power. And from that point of view, is it rational? I guess. I know that sounds horrible. That sounds pretty disgusting when I think about it.
No, but that is exactly how they think. Now, I would argue that even from that point of view, it's still not rational. Look, let's just take a company as an example, a company pursuing profit over everything else. It just does whatever it can do each year, each quarter to increase its profit. At some point, you're going to overextend yourself and it'll become unsustainable, it'll unravel, and your company will collapse. If instead you focused on sustainable wealth, doesn't mean you have to give up profits, but you just don't pursue maximum profits. You just make profits when possible while otherwise sustaining your company. Your company has a purpose. If you manufacture cars, your purpose is to make the best car for consumers while also making money and paying all of your workers and contributing to society. Now, in China, they have common prosperity built into their legal system where every company has to actually contribute first and foremost to national development, the collective benefit of everyone, and then profit comes second. And we can see Chinese companies are making more than enough profit. They're doing very well. In many cases, they're outperforming American companies while still giving back to their country, to the people that have helped them grow. In America's the opposite. They're like a swarm of locusts, and they're just stripping everything bare. And when they run out of things to strip bare, they move to the next place to start the whole process all over again until there's nothing left to strip and the population of the locusts collapse or the companies begin to collapse. It's more of a pyramid scheme than a sustainable economy and civilization. So this is what's going on. And then to your other point, what has empire done all throughout history? It is always about dividing and conquering. You cannot, if the British Empire went into the Indian subcontinent and said, we're just going to try to conquer all of these people as is. No, they had to find the fault lines, exploit them, pit these people against each other, create now generations of animosity between these different groups of people, religious, ethnic, political groups, to the point where those people can't even see reality. They're just so obsessed with these divisions that were imposed upon them or exaggerated by the British Empire. The British aren't even there anymore. And those divides are still there. Look, India and Pakistan
and India,
are right on the verge of conflict. And who does that benefit? It doesn't benefit India or Pakistan. Who does it benefit? The United States. Its hegemony over the planet. This is exactly what the British did to them. And now the United States is doing it to them again. There's obviously forces in India and Pakistan that see through this or working against it, but there's so many more that aren't, that are falling right into it, carrying water for U.S. hegemony at the expense of their own existence, just like in Ukraine. The government of Ukraine, the military, the intelligence apparatus of Ukraine did the exact same thing. They're not working for the self-preservation of Ukraine. They're dismantling it almost brick by brick. And so that is the game plan. It is to divide and destroy and hope that the U.S. is the last one standing out on the other side of this.
Yeah. Let's go to Iran for a bit. What do you think is going to happen in Iran? Do you think there are going to be strikes? I I got to be honest. I'm divided on Trump's original intentions on Iran, despite the policy papers. Because again, I don't believe for a moment that Donald Trump has opened a book in the last 20 years, not even his own, or looked into a policy paper at all. I don't think he has the ability to sit there and do it, frankly, to be bluntly honest with you. And so if I accept the premise that he may have looked at Iran and says, okay, I don't want to hold that bag. That's a big bag to hold if we attack it. So I'm going to send Witkoff and I'm going to try to get a deal. And then the people around him say, hey, you probably can get more out of that deal. Or, hey, you said that they weren't going to be nuclear reactors at all. Now, the people around him know full well that that's a red line. They know it before they say it. And you get people like Rubio or people like, Michael Anton, who are talking to him, maybe even Walz, maybe even Kellogg, saying, look, you don't want to look weak. And you can get more out of this deal if you just push a little bit more, missing the fact that there is nothing else out the deal that you can get. Meaning, to your point, I don't know what was in his mind. And regardless of what was in his mind, I can only look at the results. And the results end up being the same thing, regardless of what was in his mind. He still pushed to a point and boxed himself into this notion of, if you don't do X, I'm going to attack you. Okay, so now you've been maneuvered into, and I'm saying maneuvered. Who the hell knows, right? This could be Donald Trump's original premise. But either way, you've been maneuvered into this position where that's a hell of a cliff to walk back off. You have to do it. Meaning his ego is not going to allow him to back away from that cliff. At least I don't believe it will. And so you've already told the public for the last 3 months that you're going to attack Iran if they don't get a deal. Okay, well, you're not going to get a deal. They're not going to accept your premise for this deal. Now what? Does he really go for that attack? Or does he send Israel to do the attacking? Israel has already said, we're going to attack you. But the Pentagon has already said themselves, we're going to attack you. And I don't believe for a moment that Israel is going to attack Iran without the U.S. permission. And so whatever happens is going to be done under the auspices of the U.S. government. And I guess my thing is that going to be a bag that Donald Trump is going to be left holding?
Well, I mean, absolutely. And again, if you read the Which Path to Persia policy paper from 2009, it talks about absolutely all of this. And so the purpose of diplomacy, and this is what they say, there's an entire chapter. I think there's actually maybe 2 chapters on making a deal with Iran. The whole point of making a deal with Iran is to make it appear as if the U.S. is seeking diplomacy. And it was Iran determined to acquire nuclear weapons for all the wrong reasons that ultimately forced the U.S. to act. The U.S. didn't want to act. But Iran left them with no choice. That was the point of diplomacy. When the policy paper itself admits Iran doesn't want war with the U.S. or with Israel, if they were to get nuclear weapons, they would never use them. It's for deterrence because they've had their neighbors to the east and west of them invaded and occupied by the U.S. for two decades now. And so they have to provoke a war with Iran. Even says in the paper, there's a sentence where it says something like, it would be difficult to goad Iran into a conflict without the rest of the world recognizing the game. This is the type of language in these. That's why I beg people to please read these papers. At least read spot check it. Go jump around. You don't have to read it from cover to cover. But let's just take a step back from all of that. If President Trump didn't want to hold this bag, Iran, this conflict with Iran, all he had to do was just keep his nose out of it. Who nominated the United States, the police of the Middle East, and arbiter of what Iran is doing within its own borders? Agreed. Nobody. It was none of America's business. The only reason the U.S. is sticking its nose into Iran's business is because it wants this war in the first place, and they need to create a contacts, and they're going to do it by pretending that they tried to negotiate with Iran, and Iran refused. And it also has an entire chapter titled "Leave It to Bibi," encouraging or agreeing to something like approving of an Israeli strike. And it's all about how we could get Israel to strike Iran and have America appear to have washed its hands of all of it. But just as you say, it's not that Israel needs to get America's approval. There's no technical way they can carry out an effective strike without the U.S. aiding in absolutely every single way. Their warplanes are from the United States. Their munitions are from the United States. They need refueling capabilities from the United States. So no part of this happens without the U.S. being actively involved. The paper notes this, even back in 2009. Not much has changed since then. And so this is where we find ourselves. Plus, then you have this conflict. The U.S. is waging war against Yemen, and they're tying it to Iran. So every part of this screams duplicity and betrayal of President Trump's America First agenda, the concept of him being a peacemaker. Every single part of this is turned on its head, 180 degrees. Yeah. And you just have to open your eyes and accept that this was the plan from the beginning, before President Trump ever stepped foot in office. Project 2025, published in 2023, Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea, and actually many other countries are all on a list that the U.S. was going to deal with under a conservative presidential administration. And all Project 2025 is an addition to these other policy papers that I'm constantly referencing and reading from. So it was always the plan, and it's just a matter of convincing Americans to go along with it.
Brian, you are fantastic. I swear to God, you are, man. Brian Berletic. He is Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host and creator of the new Atlas on YouTube. Definitely check him out. It is a fantastic show. This is just the taste, right? Thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it, Brian.
Thank you.
You be safe, all right? All right. Wow. Wow.